He's trash. People like him don't belong anywhere near decent people.
In my 40 years sitting on this judicial bench, I have presided over thousands of cases. I've seen the best of humanity and the absolute worst. I have looked into the eyes of those broken by life's circumstances, and I have stared down those who believe their bank accounts make them untouchable. But the case of Chloe Vance, this one was different. It wasn't just a violation of the law. It was a violation of human decency that struck a chord deep within this courtroom. Imagine a young woman, draped in labels that cost more than most people earn in a year, standing before me with a smirk that says she expects to be home in time for her private yoga session. She didn't just break a rule. She went out of her way to humiliate a man who had given everything for this country, a homeless veteran named Arthur Pendelton. And she did it simply because she thought she could. Let me take you back to how this landed on my desk. It started as a standard disorderly conduct and harassment charge. On paper, it looked like a typical street-side dispute. But as I dug into the witness statements, 5 of them, all consistent, a chilling picture began to emerge. Chloe Vance, the 24-year-old daughter of tech billionaire Richard Vance, was leaving a high-end boutique when she encountered Arthur. Arthur wasn't begging. He wasn't even speaking. He was simply sitting on a public bench, leaning on his old military rucksack, trying to find a moment of peace. Witnesses say Chloe didn't just walk past him. She stopped. She mocked his appearance. She took out her phone to film him, laughing as she told her thousands of followers that trash belonged in the bin, not on the sidewalk. When Arthur politely asked her to stop, she didn't just refuse. She kicked his meager belongings into the gutter and told him her father owned this city, so he should get lost before she had him erased. When she walked into my courtroom today, she didn't look remorseful. She looked bored. She whispered to her $800 an hour attorney, clearly convinced that a hefty donation from her father would make this inconvenience disappear. She had no idea that, in my court, privilege doesn't buy silence, it only heightens the accountability. She looked at Arthur, who sat quietly in the back row in his faded, clean military jacket, and she rolled her eyes. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to be a standard fine. This was going to be a lesson in what it means to be a citizen of this nation. Chloe Vance thought she was untouchable. She was about to find out that the law has a very long reach. And today, it was reaching directly for her ego. The courtroom fell into a heavy, expectant silence as the first piece of evidence was projected onto the screens. It was the video Chloe Vance had recorded herself, the digital trophy of her arrogance. In the footage, the camera shakes slightly as Chloe's voice, high-pitched and dripping with mockery, cuts through the ambient noise of the city. "Look at this," she says to her followers, panning the camera toward Arthur Pendelton. "This is what happens when you don't have a plan. Just a literal human stain ruining the aesthetic of the block." Arthur didn't move. In the video, he remained seated, his back straight, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance that only he can see. He looked like a statue of endurance. But Chloe wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her designer boots clicking sharply against the pavement. "Hey, Grandpa," she sneered. "Don't you have a bridge to go hide under? You're scaring the customers. Some of us actually pay taxes to be here." I watched Chloe's face in the courtroom as the video played. She wasn't looking at the screen with shame. She was checking her manicure, occasionally whispering to her lawyer with an annoyed sigh, as if the court was wasting her valuable time. She truly believed that because her father's name was on the buildings nearby, she had a proprietary right to the very air Arthur breathed. The video then showed the moment that changed this from a verbal insult to a criminal act. Arthur had finally looked up and said, in a voice so calm it was haunting, "I've stood my post for this country, ma'am. I'm just resting my legs." Instead of backing away, Chloe snapped, "Your post? You're a loser in a dirty coat." With a sudden, violent motion, she kicked Arthur's rucksack, a worn, olive-drab bag that held everything he owned, into the wet gutter. His medals, his only photos, his meager supplies, all spilled into the dirty water. She laughed, a sound so hollow it made the jurors wince. "Now you're just trash in the trash," she yelled, before turning her back and walking away as if she had just performed a public service. As the video ended, I turned my gaze back to Chloe. The smirk was still there, tucked into the corner of her mouth. She didn't understand that she hadn't just kicked a bag. She had attacked the dignity of a man who had sacrificed his youth so she could grow up in a world of safety and luxury. She saw a stain. I saw a hero. And more importantly, I saw a defendant who had no idea that her privilege was about to become her greatest liability. The prosecution then called their first witness, a barista who had seen Chloe's victory dance after the incident. The net was closing, but Chloe still thought she was the one holding the strings. As the lights in the courtroom lifted after the video playback, the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just a hearing. It was a confrontation between two different worlds. I looked down from my bench at Chloe Vance. For the first time, the bored expression on her face was replaced by something else, a flicker of annoyance, perhaps even a hint of realization that her private content was now a public confession. Her high-priced attorney, Mr. Sterling, stood up, adjusting his silk tie with the practiced confidence of a man used to buying his way out of corners. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth and condescending. "While the video is admittedly distasteful, we must look at the context. My client is a young woman of significant standing who felt threatened. Mr. Pendleton's presence in that area is a nuisance to the local businesses, and my client was merely reacting to an uncomfortable environment. This is a case of a misunderstanding, not a crime." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "A nuisance, Mr. Sterling? A man sitting quietly on a bench is a nuisance? And kicking his medals into a gutter, is that also part of your client's reaction to an uncomfortable environment?" I didn't wait for his answer. I turned my attention to the witness stand, where the young barista, Sarah, was trembling slightly. Sarah testified about the silence that followed Chloe's outburst. She described how Arthur Pendelton didn't shout back, didn't threaten, and didn't even move to pick up his soaked belongings until Chloe had walked away. He just looked tired, Sarah whispered into the microphone. But she was laughing. She told her phone that he was bio-waste and that people like him shouldn't be allowed to breathe the same air as productive citizens. The courtroom stirred. I could see the jurors' faces hardening. Chloe, however, let out a sharp, audible huff of air and whispered something to her lawyer. My ears, sharpened by decades of courtroom theatrics, caught the tail end of it. "How much longer is this peasant going to talk?" The room went cold. I tapped my gavel once, not a loud strike, but a firm, decisive sound that demanded absolute attention. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice dropping to a level that usually makes even the most hardened criminals sit up straight. "In this room, the only productive citizens are those who respect the law and their fellow man. If you speak one more word out of turn, or show one more ounce of disrespect to this witness or this court, I will personally ensure your transition from socialite to inmate begins much sooner than you anticipated." For the first time, Chloe didn't roll her eyes. She froze. The billionaire's daughter finally realized that her father's name was printed on the building across the street, but my name was the only one that mattered inside these four walls. We were just getting started, and the privilege she wore like armor was beginning to show its first cracks. The room fell into a hush that felt heavier than any gavel strike as Arthur Pendelton stood up. He didn't rush. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of a dusty road in a country most people in this room couldn't find on a map. He took the oath with a steady hand, his eyes never leaving mine. Unlike Chloe, he wasn't looking for a camera. He was looking for justice. "Mr. Pendleton," I began, softening my tone, "please tell the court what happened that afternoon." Arthur spoke with a quiet dignity that seemed to shrink the expensive suits in the room. "He didn't talk about his hunger or the cold. He talked about the bag. That rucksack, Your Honor. It wasn't just cloth and straps," he said, his voice cracking only slightly. "Inside was the flag that covered my brother's casket. There were letters from my mother, and there were my commendations. When it hit the water in that gutter, I didn't feel anger. I just felt erased. Like 40 years of service was washed away by a laugh." I watched Chloe Vance. For the first time, she wasn't whispering. Her lawyer was staring at his legal pad, suddenly very interested in his own notes. The trash she had mocked was now revealed to be the keeper of the very freedom she used to insult him. The prosecution then entered a new document into evidence, Arthur's military record. I read it aloud for the record. ensuring every word echoed off the marble walls. Silver Star, Purple Heart, 3 tours of duty. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was a decorated hero who had fallen through the cracks of a system he had bled to defend. Miss Vance, I said, turning my gaze toward her. You told your followers that trash belongs in the bin. I want you to look at this man. I want you to look at the medals he earned while you were choosing which silk sheets to sleep on. Chloe tried to look away, her face flushing a deep, embarrassed red. The billionaire's daughter armor wasn't just cracked now. It was shattering. The public gallery was dead silent. Even her father's shadow couldn't protect her from the sheer moral weight of Arthur's presence. She had sought to make him small, to feel big. But in my courtroom, the truth had a way of reversing the scales. Arthur Pendelton was the largest person in the room, and Chloe Vance was beginning to look very, very small. The silence in the courtroom following Arthur's testimony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. But instead of an apology, Chloe's attorney, Mr. Sterling, stood up to perform what he called damage control. He began to argue that while the incident with the bag was regrettable, it didn't constitute a felony. He argued that Chloe was a victim of a viral narrative and that the public outcry was unfairly targeting a young woman for a single moment of frustration. I watched Chloe during this. She wasn't looking at Arthur. She was looking at her phone under the table. Even now, with a Silver Star recipient sitting 5 feet away from her, she was more concerned with her digital reflection than the human reality in front of her. Mr. Sterling, I interrupted, my voice echoing with a cold, sharp edge. Your client seems remarkably preoccupied for someone facing 3 criminal charges. Miss Vance, please put the phone on the table. Now. She startled, dropping the device onto the wood with a loud clatter. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and indignation. It's just my manager, Your Honor, she stammered. They're trying to handle the PR nightmare this is causing for my father's company. A PR nightmare? I leaned over the bench, my gaze pinning her to her seat. Is that what you call a veteran's life? Being treated like refuse? A branding issue? I signaled to my clerk, who handed me a printed document. Miss Vance, I'm looking at an Instagram story you posted exactly 45 minutes before you walked into this building. It's a photo of your latte with the caption, "Dealing with a ridiculous legal situation today. This city is honestly so small-minded. Number free Chloe," followed by an eye roll emoji. The courtroom gasped. Sterling looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Chloe's face went from red to a ghostly, terrified white. You call this ridiculous? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think the fact that Mr. Pendleton's brother's funeral flag is currently sitting in an evidence bag, soaked in gutter water, is small-minded? I stood up, the black robes of my office feeling heavier than they ever had. In 40 years, I have seen many people make mistakes. I have seen accidents. I have seen moments of genuine human error. But what I see here is something far more toxic. I see a person who believes that because she was born on third base, she owns the whole stadium. You didn't just kick a bag, Miss Vance. You tried to kick a man out of existence because he didn't fit your aesthetic. Chloe finally started to tremble. Not the calculated tremble of a victim, but the raw, shaking fear of a predator who realized the cage door had just locked from the outside. The billionaire's daughter was gone. In her place sat a young woman who was about to learn that in this courtroom, the only currency that matters is character, and hers was currently bankrupt. I stood up, and for the first time in 40 years, I didn't feel like a man in a robe. I felt like the voice of 1,000 forgotten heroes. I looked at Chloe Vance. The fear in her eyes was finally real. But it wasn't the fear of a repentant heart. It was the fear of a lifestyle about to be dismantled. Her father, Richard Vance, had finally arrived, sitting in the front row with a scowl that said he was ready to buy the courthouse if it meant saving his daughter from a mugshot. He didn't realize that in my court, his billions were just paper. Miss Vance, I began, the silence in the room so absolute that the hum of the air conditioner sounded like a roar. You have spent 24 years believing that the world is a stage and everyone else is just an extra in your highlight reel. You treated a Silver Star recipient like trash because he didn't fit your aesthetic. You mocked the very hands that fought for your right to be this arrogant. I picked up the gavel, but I didn't strike it yet. I wanted every word to land like a physical weight. On the charges of intentional harassment and reckless endangerment, I find you guilty. But a fine isn't enough for someone who treats money like water. You need to understand what it feels like to be bio-waste, to be invisible, to be stripped of the armor you use to bully the world. I saw Richard Vance start to stand up, but one look from my bailiff sat him right back down. Here is your sentence, I continued. First, the maximum fine allowed by law, $15,000, payable immediately. Second, you will provide full restitution to Mr. Pendleton, which will include the professional restoration and preservation of his brother's military flag and the replacement of every item you kicked into that gutter. Chloe nodded quickly, her face showing a brief flash of relief. She thought she was getting off easy. She was wrong. Third, I said, my voice dropping an octave, your driving privileges are suspended for 18 months. Your luxury SUV will be impounded at your own expense. Fourth, you are sentenced to 500 hours of community service, and you won't be picking up trash on a highway. You will be serving meals and cleaning floors at the Veterans Outreach Center, the very same center Mr. Pendleton attends. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a marble statue of despair. And finally, I added, looking directly into her eyes, since you enjoy filming your content so much, you are banned from all social media platforms for the duration of your 1-year probation. If I see so much as an eye roll emoji from an account associated with your name, I will revoke your probation and you will serve the full term in the county jail. You wanted to make Mr. Pendleton invisible? Now, it's your turn to be quiet. The gavel finally came down, a crack of thunder that signaled the end of Chloe Vance's reign of privilege. She collapsed back into her chair, her mouth hanging open. Her father surged forward to speak to his lawyers, but I was already looking at Arthur. He sat with his back straight, a small, weary smile touching his lips. For the first time in that parking lot, he wasn't the one being erased. The billionaire's daughter was now just a defendant with a mop in her future, and justice, for once, was the only thing on the menu. After the courtroom doors swung shut and the media frenzy began to fade, the real work started. Many people thought my sentence was about theater, but I don't believe in performance. I believe in transformation. 2 weeks after the trial, I received the first report from the director of the Veterans Outreach Center. I sat in my quiet office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over my desk, and read about a Chloe Vance that the world had never seen on Instagram. Chloe had arrived for her first shift at 6 a.m. There was no chauffeur, no white luxury SUV, and no filtered lens to hide behind. She had to take the city bus, a journey that forced her to sit among the very people she used to call inconveniences. According to the report, she walked into the center wearing a plain gray sweatshirt and work boots, looking smaller and more fragile than she ever had in her designer silks. The center is a place of stark realities. It smells of industrial floor cleaner, cheap coffee, and the weary resilience of men who have seen too much. For the first 4 hours, Chloe was assigned to the scullery, the dish pit. She, whose hands had likely never touched dishwater in her life, spent the morning scrubbing industrial-sized pots, used to feed 300 veterans. But the real test came during the lunch service. As part of her restitution, I had mandated that she serve the meals directly. I wanted her to look into the eyes of every man she had dismissed as trash. Halfway through the line, a man in a faded, clean military jacket approached. It was Arthur Pendelton. The report described a moment of absolute stillness. Chloe froze, a ladle of stew suspended in midair. Arthur didn't scowl. He didn't mock her. He simply held out his tray and said, "Thank you, ma'am. It smells delicious." Chloe didn't say anything at first. Her eyes welled up, not with the performative tears of a defendant trying to avoid jail, but with the raw, burning sting of shame. She served him his meal, her hands shaking so hard the ladle clattered against the plastic tray. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the star of the show. She was a servant to a hero. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the photo attached to the report, a candid shot taken from a security camera. It showed Chloe, her hair messy, her face flushed, leaning over a table to wipe a spill while a group of veterans talked about their time in the service. She was listening, truly listening. Humility isn't something you can teach with a lecture. It's something you have to earn through the grit of service. Chloe Vance was finally learning that a person's value isn't measured by their reach or their father's net worth, but by the weight of the burdens they are willing to help others carry. The stain she had tried to erase was becoming the very thing that was finally cleaning her soul. 6 months after that fateful day in my courtroom, I found myself back at the Veterans Outreach Center. I wasn't there as a judge. I was there as a guest for their annual reorganization ceremony. As I walked through the hall, I saw a young woman standing near the entrance, handing out programs. She wasn't wearing designer labels or looking at a phone. She was wearing the center's volunteer vest, her hair pulled back, talking animatedly with an elderly veteran in a wheelchair. It was Chloe Vance. When she saw me, she didn't flinch or look away with the eye roll that had started this journey. She walked over, stood tall, and simply said, "Good afternoon, Judge Boyd. Thank you for coming." There was a quiet strength in her voice that hadn't existed before. She told me she had completed her 500 hours, but she had decided to stay on as a permanent volunteer. She told me about the letters she had helped veterans write to their families and how she had spent her weekends learning about the history of the medals she had once kicked into the dirt. But the most powerful moment came at the end of the ceremony. Arthur Pendelton stood at the podium. Beside him sat his rucksack, now professionally restored, the leather supple and the brass buckles gleaming. Inside, his brother's flag had been cleaned and placed in a beautiful, protective mahogany display case, funded entirely by Chloe's restitution. Arthur looked out at the crowd and then directly at Chloe. "Sometimes," he said, his voice echoing with a profound peace, "justice doesn't just punish. Sometimes it builds a bridge where there was only a wall. I have my dignity back. And I think Chloe found hers too." As I left the center that day, I looked up at the city skyline, at the tall buildings with names like Vance etched in glass. Those names represent power, but they don't represent the heart of this country. The heart of America is found in the parking lots where grandmothers protect their children, in the quiet benches where heroes rest their legs, and in the courtrooms where the truth is the only currency that buys a future. To those watching this, never believe that your status makes you better than the man standing next to you, and never believe that being small makes you invisible. In my court, and in the eyes of true justice, every soul carries the same weight. Chloe Vance learned that the hard way, but she came out the other side a human being instead of a brand. And Arthur Pendelton? He's no longer a human stain on a sidewalk. He is a reminder to us all that honor is a flame that no amount of gutter water can ever truly put out.